Hola amigos, bienvenidos a Conversaciones de Altura. Soy Joel, muchísimas gracias por sintonizarnos. Este es el episodio 81 y como invitado tenemos a Tony Tornay, baterista de Fatso Jetson y de All Souls. Estos últimos grandes amigos del programa ya han estado un par de veces. Y bueno, Fatso Jetson es una de las bandas que inició el movimiento Desert Rock ahí en Palm Springs, California, cerca de Joshua Tree, que es donde se conoce comúnmente por ir a comer hongos. Pero bueno, también tienen un estudio de grabación muy importante, olvida el nombre. De hecho, salió en un episodio con Anthony Bourdain. Pero bueno, Fatso Jetson ha influenciado a muchísimas bandas como Queens of the Stone Age, entre muchas otras. Y pues Tony, un excelente baterista, y platicamos de mucho punk rock, de cómo es crecer en el desierto, de todas estas fiestas que organizaban con generadores, de moverse a vivir a Los Ángeles, tocar con Old Souls, procesos de grabación, entre muchos otros temas, amigos, así que no se lo pierdan. Y no olviden, ya saben, suscribirse al canal de YouTube. Estamos en Instagram, en Twitter, Facebook como Conversaciones de Altura para que le den like, compartan con su pandilla. En YouTube estaría increíble si se suscriben al canal, por favor, esto nos ayudaría mucho. Y pues nada, pandilla, los dejamos con Tony, ahí se ven. Hola amigos, bienvenidos a Conversaciones de Altura. Estoy muy emocionado por nuestro siguiente invitado, uno de los bateristas que últimamente he escuchado mucho gracias a la banda de mis amigos Meg y Tony All Souls. Y nuestro invitado es Tony Tornay, o Tornay maybe, toca en una banda que me gusta mucho también que se llama Fatso Jetson y por supuesto All Souls. Hello Tony, how are you, brother?
I'm good. I'm good.
Did I say your last name correctly? Is it Tornay or Tornay?
Tornay.
Tornay. Okay. I'm always have like a hard time with last names in English because sometimes I kind of have like the idea of how to say it, but then when I say them, like, no, it's not the right way. I guess it's how it sounds.
Yeah. It's just Tornay.
Okay. Thanks, brother. How are you? Are you in LA now?
I am. I live in a neighborhood here called Silver Lake.
Okay.
Kind of near Dodger Stadium and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that area. My friend Calixto, you probably met him. He works at this place, La Cita Bar.
Oh yeah. I know where that is.
Yeah, Barrio Tiger is his name, the name of his band, Barrio
Oh,
Tiger.
okay. Yeah. I don't know those guys personally, but I know of them.
Yeah, so I mean, I had him on the show a long time ago, and he was talking about living in like Silver Lake and that area, right?
Yeah.
It's so cool. So first of all, congratulations on the live streaming, man. It was really good. I watched it over the weekend. Both sets were amazing.
Awesome. Well, thanks, man. Yeah, we're proud of it, man. We're really happy with how it all turned out.
Was it weird for you guys to play in front of a camera, trying to play as if you were in front of people?
No, I mean, I've over the years I've filmed enough videos and TV performances and stuff that I mean, it's, I guess you'd always like to, in theory, be playing in front of people. There's a certain energy there, and when you're just like in an empty studio, it's a little different. But no, I mean, for me, I just put my head down and just try to hit my drums as hard as I can and not make any mistakes.
Yeah, I feel you, man. Did you feel more connected to your bandmates maybe in that setting? Not that you're not connected live, but maybe because it's more intimate and you know that it's kind of, yeah, like it's more intimate, between the four of you.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, this particular thing, it had been over a year since we had played because of the pandemic. So, I mean, I was just really focused and I was really nervous about fucking up, and so it was like, just put your head down and just try to get through this. Because I mean, even though we continued to practice and play through the whole pandemic, like, it's one thing to do that in the rehearsal room, but when you have a couple of people pointing cameras at you and you're being recorded and that it's going to exist forever, that's a different dynamic, So it was, to be honest with you, I wasn't paying so much attention to what everybody else was doing as making sure I didn't fuck up what I was doing.
Right. So was it similar to maybe like recording an album, like you are under the
I mean,
microscope?
it was, it definitely was sort of more of that vibe in the sense of just, I mean, because we recorded this knowing that we wanted to release it as a live album at a later date. And so, I mean, they're definitely, like I was saying earlier, without there being an audience there and all that, you start kind of focusing on like what you're doing or what you could have done better or, whatever.
So have you, I mean, probably you have recorded a lot of live shows and everything like that. Do you prepare yourself more when you're gonna record something live? You know what I mean? Because I guess there's like the boys telling you, okay, they're recording you can't fuck this up.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, I mean, yeah, you always know it's there, but at some point you kind of have to give up the ghost and just like let it go, and just play because, part of all that is, also you don't want it to affect your performance where, you're getting so in your head about it that it just becomes really tight and everything. I mean, the way I've always approached it is, I just let it rip and hope for the best, kind of. I mean, I've been playing drums since I was 5. I think I know enough of what there's always a chance you're going to make a mistake, and I mean, that's just a part of being human, and I'd much rather, personally, I would rather, kind of go 100% and, I'm always kind of much more like, let's just jump off the cliff and let's see what happens. And if I mean, we did have the opportunity to go back. If somebody really made a mistake, we had the opportunity to go back and redo the song, so it wasn't like recording a live concert, where you're being filmed live and it's beaming out to the world or whatever. But I mean, there's also, I mean, again, we're humans and we make mistakes, and I would rather make a little mistake that nobody in the world will ever notice except for me,
right?
But have played my balls off than played really conservatively and never made a mistake. It's
for sure, man. It's more gratifying, right, when you let go.
Yeah.
So, okay, I want to take you back to your childhood, because I was, in order to prepare for the interview, I was watching and listening to your conversation with Brian Walsby. So you are from Palm Springs, which is now called Coachella Valley, right?
Yeah, well, there's a place called the Coachella Valley, and the Coachella Valley is a string of towns. There's Palm Springs, Cathedral City, Rancho Mirage, Palm Desert, La Quinta, Indio, Coachella. I grew up in Palm Desert, but the Coachella Valley, to equate it to something else, it's kind of like saying Los Angeles. I mean, Los Angeles is a big area that encompasses a lot of different little cities, and so it's the same thing. It's like the Coachella Valley is just geographically the area, and then there's a bunch of little cities within that valley.
Okay, I see. And how was it growing up there? I'm fascinated by the idea of, like, I grew up in Mexico City, right? So I'm not familiar with growing up in a small town. And let's not talk about growing up in the desert, right? I mean, not in the desert per se, but are surrounded by desert. How was it for you?
Well, I mean, it's growing up in the desert was a weird thing. It was weird because when we were all kids and when we were in it, all we wanted to do was get out of it. Like San Diego is 2 hours to the west of us. Los Angeles is 2 hours northwest of us. There's Orange County up there. There's all these cities where things were actually happening are just far enough away that you can't really get to it, especially as a kid.
Right.
But it's close enough that you hear about everything that's happening there. But when you're growing up in a smaller town, it's like all you want to do. Well, all I wanted to do is get to the city where the action is. I mean, the desert back in the early mid 80s, it wasn't a place for kids. I mean, there were no nightclubs. I mean, we didn't even have skate parks. We didn't. There was nothing. And so you had to make your own fun. Like you had to learn how to build a half pipe to go skateboarding on. If you wanted to play music, like you had to figure out your instrument yourself. You kind of had to start figuring out, like, how do you do this, and
sure.
So, I mean, it at the time, I hated it because I thought I was missing out on all this rad stuff that was happening in Los Angeles or even San Diego or whatever. In retrospect, I look back and I'm so glad I grew up where I did, because it forced us to figure things out by ourselves. We didn't have a nightclub that was doing shows, so we had to, we couldn't even find a place most of the time that would allow us to do that. So what we would do is get a generator and go out into the desert and throw these parties. And but that taught us, I mean, it taught us how to be a band, but it taught us like how to start putting on shows, how to promote it, how to, and keep in mind that these parties were not official in any way. Like there was no security, there was no nothing. So, every once in a while, things would get out of control, and people would start fighting, whatever, or I mean, there were all kinds of things that could go wrong, but most of the time they went right. And we were 16-year-old kids, 15, 14-year-old kids when we started doing this.
Wow.
And it was just sort of like, I mean, we did it because we didn't have anything else to do.
Okay.
And we didn't have anywhere to go. I mean, honestly, growing up out in the desert, like the only things that were really there for kids was there was an arcade to play video games at the mall and a movie theater. But other than that, it was you got to figure it out for yourself,
Wow.
and thankfully I latched on to skateboarding and punk rock at a very young age. And both of those things instill the idea of do it yourself. It's like nobody's going to make this happen. And especially back in the 80s, before the internet, before skateboard, before the X Games and all that, like, skateboarding was this thing that you were really into, you loved, but there was nowhere to do it. But Thrasher magazine, you'd see these photos of like a half pipe, and it's like, well, I can build one of those. My dad's got some tools. We'll go down to like the local construction site and steal some plywood and some 2x4s, because when you're 12 years old, you don't have the money to pay for that stuff. And so I mean, a little creative crime, so to speak, and right. Then just like you figure it out. It's I remember not knowing how to build a ramp, and it was like, well, I have to figure that out, and through trial and error, sometimes you make the transition too tight and it's not skatable, or but again, that was the thing about growing up in the desert, is it forced you to figure out how to do it yourself.
Right.
And that's that in retrospect, at the time, I hated it. I hated it when I was 12 years old. Even when I was 19 years old, it was like, fuck, man, I just want to be in the city where things are happening. I'm stuck out here. But in retrospect, I'm so glad I did that, because I mean, spending 5, 6, 7, 8 years as a kid doing it yourself taught me more lessons than growing up in any city could have.
Nah, for sure, man. I bet it. I mean, well, you just said it. It came out of necessity, or a need actually of releasing your own creativity, right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: what came first, like the skateboarding or punk rock? Well, or was it like a thing that okay, I started skateboarding and then because of the Thrasher videos and everything, then punk rock came, and then because I guess this is like a two-part question. And then your approach to punk rock, was it because of the music itself or because of the mindset and the philosophy?
Well, I mean, I think skateboarding and punk rock kind of came together. It was almost kind of hand in hand, like when before I found punk, I was into heavy metal. I was into Judas Priest and whatever, and which is all great. Don't get me wrong. Like
I
I
love
love
it.
Judas Priest. I love AC/DC. I'm totally into it. But there was something about the Bad Brains and Minor Threat and Black Flag and X and these bands that were doing stuff that honestly it was my friends' older brothers, that all kind of were like, oh dude, you got to get it, check this out. And a lot of it, it was, we were just like trading cassette tapes, or mixtapes, like my friend Josh, his older brother Mike played in a band, and which was another thing, is that all my friends as older brothers, they were playing in bands or into skateboarding and whatever, and so you'd kind of look at what they were doing and try to kind of figure it out.
Right.
And I got into all that stuff at a really young age, meaning like 10, 11, 12 years old. And but it was because I had the older brothers,
Right.
of all my friends, that were kind of like, oh, you think that's cool? You need to check this out, or whatever. And so, I mean, a lot of it again was just, yeah, I mean, it was we were kind of, I don't want to say we were isolated, but we were removed from, like I said earlier, Los Angeles was far enough away that it what didn't seem reachable when we were like 12, 13 years old. So, you just start kind of running with the ideas in your head and trying to figure it out. And yeah, I mean, a big part of it was just, to me, it was the freedom of, you don't need, when you're 12 years old, a band like Pink Floyd or something, who I love,
Right.
but seems kind of unapproachable. It's like you see that, and even a lot of the Iron Maiden, all the metal stuff I was listening to, it's like, the musicianship was so good that as a 12-year-old, you're just sort of like, wait, how do I approach this? And then for me personally, when punk rock came along, it was it wasn't so much about the technical ability as the ideas and just the energy of it. And that helped me personally, just as a musician, getting off my feet. It was like, okay, I don't need to know all of this music theory. I don't need, I can just like go in a room with like a couple of my buddies and just start like stripping rock and roll down to its bones and going with that.
Right. Wow, interesting. So when you were growing up and listening to punk rock and everything, and you mentioned it, you were kind of isolated from like San Diego and LA. How were you going to? Okay, I guess my question would be: were bands from LA and San Diego coming to play shows? I mean, I know Black Flag, like they play a lot, like smaller cities, but
Well, yeah, Black Flag played twice in the desert. I mean, when I was a kid, the 4 shows that I knew that happened and that were not local bands, no, 5 shows. There were 5 that there. Black Flag played twice. The Cramps played once, except for they didn't actually play. I wasn't even old enough to go to this show, but apparently they showed up and the venue didn't have their money, so they just never even played. And then the first concert I ever went to was Billy Idol.
Wow.
And then the year before that, which I didn't go to, was Adamant. But I mean, it was very, very rare for a band to stop in the desert to play. You know,
Wow.
it just like I said, the Black Flag thing, that was, some people knew those guys. They booked a show, but that was before my time. I remember the show, but you know, when I asked my parents if I could go to this rock concert, I was in the like 3rd or 4th grade, and they were like, "You're not going to that," you know. And then you know, there, like I said, there was the Adamant show, and then finally Billy Idol. But then after that, nothing happened in the desert in terms of touring bands until Pearl Jam played with our friend Alan's band 11 at the place that the Coachella Music Festival is now held at. But it was when Pearl Jam was like fighting Ticketmaster in the early 90s or whatever, and they couldn't play anywhere in LA because they were all Ticketmaster venues. So the promoter found this field out in Indio, which is now where, like I said, where they do Coachella. But yeah, other than that, people weren't coming to the desert to play shows. Like we as kids, we had to go to them.
Wow, that's fascinating. So from like the 80s till like this Pearl Jam show, there were no shows, and you were traveling to LA to see bands, or
Yeah.
what bands were you seeing back then?
I mean, you know, let's see, like bands like Bad Brains, and then later, you know, I mean, Nirvana, Mudhoney, Sonic Youth, Saccharine Trust. I mean, pretty much all the LA bands. And then you know, I mean, I started coming up to Los Angeles to see shows probably in about the 10th grade. So, I mean, there were times though where I went to shows of bands I just didn't even like, but I went just to go because it was something to do. But I mean, you name a band from that time period, so to speak, and I probably saw them. I mean, especially as things got a little bit, or as I got a little bit older, you know, I'd come up to LA sometimes 3 times a week to see shows. And, you know, I mean, it's a 4-hour round trip. So it's like, you're not getting home until like 4 in the morning or whatever. Or I had friends' bands. Like there was a band from the desert called Caius. And when they started playing up here, you know, sometimes I'd hop in the pickup truck, you know, with my buddies and come on up with them and try to sneak in. But that was the other thing, is that, you know, in California, the drinking age is 21 to get into a bar. So there were times when I was like 16 years old that I would drive 2 hours to get to a show in LA and hope that I could sneak in, you know, and sometimes, you know, I got caught and I'd end up having to sit outside while everybody else went to the show.
Oh shit, man, that
Yeah.
that sucks. I mean, in Mexico you could be 12, and even though the show is, I mean, it's not like that anymore, but like back in the day you could go see a show even though it's like for people older than 18, and you could go inside, you know. Like I remember.
Oh yeah, there was a place in Tijuana called Iguanas,
Iguanas,
and
yeah, legendary.
we used to drive there all the time because, you know, if a band was playing a 21 and older venue in LA, but they were playing the next night or the night after at Iguanas, we knew that we could get in at Iguanas. So we drive down to San Diego, walk
Awesome.
across the border, and like down there, geez, I saw, before I was 21, I saw the Bad Brains there. I saw Bad Religion, Nirvana, Dinosaur Jr., The Breeders, I think the Butthole Surfers.
For sure, man.
You know, but it was always just like, okay, yeah, we're going to go to Iguanas because not only can we get in, but they wouldn't card you for alcohol either. So, you know, we're like 16-year-old kids, like getting drunk on like, you know, cheap Mexican beer, but we're at the show. So that's really all that mattered.
I love it, man, because I think you're the first person. I'm from Mexico, like I've said before, and I haven't talked to anyone. Well, maybe once I talked to someone about it, but you're the first person that has explained me how was the whole Iguanas thing, because in Mexico City, it's legendary. Like I knew, and someone recently posted on Facebook like an old calendar of Iguanas, and everyone was there, like you said, Dinosaur Jr., Helmet, Radiohead, Nirvana. So I'm like, what the fuck? And those bands, funny enough, they didn't come to Mexico City.
Yeah, well, because, you know, what the Iguanas, the way that I understand it, you know, Iguanas was owned by Mexicans, but they used a San Diego promoter to book it. So bands that were touring America, they would end up playing down there. You know, because I mean, Iguanas was literally 5 minutes across the border from San Diego. So in essence, you know, like you didn't, to get to Mexico City, you got to hop on a plane and get down there, you know, or whatever. Whereas that was just an easy stop, you know, because San Diego's always had a really weird, like they're the rock and roll scene in San Diego, though it's a really great scene, it didn't generate a ton of clubs, you know, like there's the Casbah, which was always great, but the Casbah has always been 21 and older. And then there were a couple other places that have existed here and there, but you know, the Iguanas was probably held about 800 people or so. So it was bigger than like the Casbah is only like 350 people, I think, you know, and I think it just filled this hole of sort of bigger than a club band, but not as big as like a theater type band. But yeah, I mean, so if bands were going, if a bigger band like Dinosaur Jr. was going down there, it just, I think, was a more economical place for them to play. And, you know, the bonus for people like me was we could get in, because if bands played the Casbah, you know, not until I got a fake ID a couple years later, but I couldn't get in, you know?
Right. So, sorry to
interrupt. Funny story though about Iguanas, and I went to go see, it was Nirvana opening up for Dinosaur Jr. And I was about 18 years old, and me and a bunch of my friends from the desert loaded up a car and got down there. And we were all drinking beers in the parking lot before the show. And keep in mind, Nevermind isn't out yet. This is still just Nirvana's Bleach, which had no photos of them on it except for that weird black and white negative image on the front. But we're me and my friend Justin and Dave and a couple other people are sitting there drinking like Tecates or whatever. And this really tall guy just comes up to us and he's all, "Hey man, you guys might want to chill out on those beers. The Federales just like arrested some kids around the corner." And we, like, he just looked like this tall, nerdy kind of guy. We're all, "Whatever, man, you know, thanks, you know, whatever." And then we go inside, and when Nirvana started playing, it was Chris Novoselic.
Oh, wow.
And we were all, "Oh God, whoops."
That's awesome, man. So I would imagine that most people in the show were Americans. Is that correct? Or
yeah,
was it like half and half?
No. It was, I mean, I would guesstimate probably 85-90% Americans that, you know, went over to the crazy rock and roll show.
Right. Wow. So yeah, it's fascinating because like back then I was listening to metal and I was going to shows, local shows in Mexico City, but we didn't, or at least my friends and I didn't hear about this place Iguana. That came years after. So there was this, I don't know if this connection, but it was unknown. We were like, I remember we were trying to, the first time Pantera came to Mexico City, we were like, "Oh my God, this is so awesome." But then I think they play somewhere in Tijuana, right? So it's really cool that someone is telling me these stories from my own country. Yeah, it's crazy, man. So how did drums come to you? Was it something that you choose, or because your brothers, your friends?
That was my dad.
Oh,
My dad played drums, and I remember the night that I became a drummer. I was sitting in the kitchen at the dining room table, and my mom was making us fried chicken, and I was sitting there waiting, and I was getting hungry, and I just started kind of tapping on the table. And then, dinner came and everything, and I just kind of kept tapping. I mean, I wasn't consciously like playing along to anything. Like I was just killing time, to be honest with you, like waiting for my food. And I just remember my mom looking at my dad, and she was all, looks like it's time to pull out your drums. And I didn't really understand what that meant, but my parents were very into music, very into rock and roll. My mom and dad both, I mean, you name a band from the 60s, early 70s, they saw them. I mean, technically, the first concert I ever went to, my parents took me to go see the Rolling Stones when I was like 2 years old.
wow.
Because they couldn't find a babysitter for me. This is like 1974 or something like that. So it's like just music's had always been a part of my life. And then when I found out that like, whoa, I can actually play drums, I got like excited. And, my dad had played in a band. He'd played in bands. He played shows back in the 50s. But then my pops at one point or another, he went to college and he wanted to be a doctor. And in America, we have a thing called the GI Bill, where if you join the military, they pay for your college. And so my dad joined the military to put himself through medical school. And when he did that, like playing music just kind of fell away from my dad, but he kept his drum set. And that ended up being the drum set that was my first drum set when I was like 5 years old. My parents, pulled out the drums, and my dad showed me kind of, here's how you set them up, here's a couple rough ideas. And, that was all great, but really ever since the drums came out, all I wanted to do was like play with people. I to this day, and I kind of regret it, I never took any drum lessons. I just learned how to do it myself. I taught myself by listening to other people. And, I kind of regret not knowing some of the rudiments and the base, it's not the basics, but it's just, I learned by doing it, versus like my technique. I bet you there's some jazz drummer that would look at how I play drums and just be like, oh my God, what is he doing? But I feel like I do an okay job, but so yeah, I got it through my dad.
Well, I think you do a great, amazing job. Actually, I haven't had the chance to see you live, but I've seen a lot of videos, and I mean, I think you're a savage at the drums, and I say savage in the best way possible.
That's my dad in 1959 on what would later become my drum set.
Wow. Do you still have that drum set? That's an amazing picture.
No, unfortunately, I don't. What happened was I was probably about 11 years old, 10 or 11 years old. And, I had kept the drum set up, and I played it enough, and I showed enough interest that my parents finally, they went ahead and bought me my own drum set. They got me a newer, like a brand new drum set in 1982 or something like that. And when I went away to summer camp that summer, my dad's not a very sentimental person, and he just donated it to Goodwill, which like to this day, I'm like, I can't believe he did that, but I wish to God I still had that drum set, but
yeah, that would be
it's
awesome.
gone.
So yeah, that's an interesting story, man. So do you think drums came to you, or Well, yeah, I guess so. Drums came to you instinctually, you know, is that, do you believe that sometimes we have something in the DNA that makes us do something? You know, your dad is a drummer, so that's in you somehow?
Yeah, I mean, you know, one, you know, at first, like when I first sat down with the drums, I remember like, you know, MTV was kind of a new thing at the time. And, you know, I remember playing along to the Police, Every Breath You Take, you know, and like just like, okay, so this is kind of what you do to play in a band, whatever. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, you know, it's a form of expression, you know, it's and so, you know, even if you're learning by copying other people, you know, lights start going off in your head like, oh, well, he does this here, but I could do that. Or, you know, it all starts to kind of make sense once you figure out how the whole thing operates. And for me, that was a really big thing, was I couldn't wait to just get in a room with other people. Because like as much as I love the drums, it's very rare that I just sit down and just play the drums by myself. You know, I mean, I'll work on patterns or this or that by myself. I have an electronic drum set right behind me that I'll like here at my house, like kind of noodle around on. But like when it comes to playing, music has always been a reaction to other people, you know, or if not a reaction, a collaboration, you know, where it's like, even if it's just one person with like a guitar or a bass or whatever, you know, it's like, well, what do you got? Let me see how I can, let's see what we can do with this. You know, I was always more interested in being in a band than just being a really great drummer, you know? So like to me, you know, and it goes back to me not learning a lot of the rudiments and stuff, but I was just so eager to like play rock and roll, you know? It's like I want to be playing, not sitting there like, you know, going like treating it like math, like 1+1 is 2 and blah blah, you know. It's like I wanted to like be swinging my arms around and hitting shit, you know, and making noise, not, you know, worrying about why I was doing it.
Right. Let me ask you this, and would like to hear your opinion, because I play guitar and I'm learning to play bass myself. But sometimes I feel like I'm grading a song or a riff or whatever, but I feel bad if I don't play this with people, because then what's the point of making music if you're not going to share it with the world? You know, and I'm not trying to be egocentric or my music, but just the idea of kind of like sharing your gift with the world. Is that something that you felt somehow?
I mean, yeah, yes and no. They're it's weird. Some of my favorite moments playing music, nobody's ever gonna hear it because nobody was there recording it. Like it was me and a couple people in a room somewhere just playing for the sake of playing. And you know, some of that stuff, because there isn't, you know, it's one thing when you're writing a record and you know you know that it's this document that's going to live on for God knows how many years, and you know, whatever, you know, you start like being very precious about things. Whereas if you're just in a rehearsal room with a buddy, maybe 2 3 buddies, whatever, and you're just playing for the sheer fun of playing, you know, that you're freed of all of that other bullshit. And like, you know, it doesn't matter, excuse me, it doesn't matter if somebody fucks up and doesn't hit the one, or you know, whatever. It like, so I mean, I think it can go either way. I mean, you know, like I said, some of my favorite moments have been literally sitting in a room just playing, you know, without, just for the fun of it, you know, not for, you know, nobody's thinking about is this going to be a song? Is this going to be put out on something? Is this, it's just, you're doing it because you love doing it. It's like a painter that just sits down and paints a still life that they see just for the sheer enjoyment of painting, and so I like I said, I think it can go either way, because I mean, at the same time, when any band that I've ever been in, when you're faced with the idea of like, we're recording a record, like, yeah, we gotta bring the goods, and I love doing that too, but I do love just blasting off with some people sometimes, because it you're just doing something that you love just for the enjoyment of it, without getting so caught up in your head about verses and choruses and what the overdub might be and the melody, and it's just fun.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting. I've been asking myself that a lot. Like, okay, if I have this song, should I stop completing it, or just because I know it's not going to come out, should I just stop there? So, but it's interesting to see your point of view too. Like, okay, I'm doing this because I enjoy playing music, as opposed to playing music and then show it to the world. I think, yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just for me, a lot of playing music is like, the intention is to enjoy myself, but before anything else, like, I love playing music, and I don't think, as long as I live, I don't imagine I will ever not play music in some capacity or another. It's like, it's something that I need to do. And, some of the best ideas I've ever had musically have come out of, these like jam sessions where there isn't this like weight of like, well, what are we going to do with this? It's like, sometimes, the best song you write is when you just sit down on a couch, pull out a guitar and turn on the news, and you're just kind of like fiddling around without really paying attention. And then all of a sudden you hit on something and you're like, holy shit, that's really great. But had you sat down in a room with no distractions and a guitar, it might not have been that easy, because you're trying too hard almost,
No, for sure. So now that you mentioned that you enjoy a lot this type of creating music, like the jamming and everything, what are the difference between, for example, making music with All Souls and Fatso Jetson? I have the feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Fatso Jetson, sorry, it's more like a jammy thing, and then, okay, we have something here, as opposed of maybe All Souls, that it's, I don't want to say more structure, but maybe.
No, it is though. I mean, All Souls is a much more deliberate band. Everything gets thought through a lot more. We spend a lot more time kind of tinkering with things, and whereas with Fatso Jetson, we do that too, but there's also a lot of sort of just whimsical stuff that'll happen, where like even if a song on the record is verse chorus bridge, verse chorus outro, like a simple song structure, when we play live, a lot of times that just sort of goes out the window, and it becomes kind of like verse chorus jam for a minute, then somebody will kind of like Fatso Jetson works a lot more on the intuition of all of us together. And keep in mind that Fatso Jetson, me and Mario and Larry have been playing together for 27 years now.
Wow.
So it's like one of those things that when I'm playing drums, I already know how those guys play. It's like I can anticipate what they're going to do. Like, even if we're jamming on something that we've never done before, like if we just go, if right now we went into the rehearsal room with no ideas and we just started doing something, I feel like I would have a pretty good sense of like how things might come out or where things would be going. And, you know, I mean, I can literally look at Mario and just by his body, like his posture, I can be like, oh, I can just tell he's about to do this kind of thing that like, I kind of know he does. And it's like, okay, cool. And, you know, I can look at Larry and be like, okay, Larry's doing this thing. But I mean, that comes from playing together for 27 years, you know, where
Sure.
It's like when you wake up in the middle of the night and get out of bed and no lights are on, but you know how to get around your house because you've done it so many times. That's kind of what playing in Fatso Jetson is like. And we kind of celebrate that. Like part of the thing that Fatso does is allow for these things to breathe a little bit. I mean, and like I said, we do have some songs that are, you know, here's the verse, here's the chorus, here's the blah, 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 blah. But a lot of it, you know, is open to interpretation. Whereas All Souls is a lot more, you know, like I said, we pay a lot of attention to the details and structure and where things should be. And, you know, it's a much more regimented band in that sense. So
wow. No, I mean, I like the explanation because I think it's different, two types of band. Was it a challenge when you started jamming with Tony Aguilar and Meg? Because I mean, like you said, it's more structure, as in, okay, like you said, this is the song, this is where the solo goes, and the solo lasts for like, I don't know, 45 seconds. You know what I mean? I suppose.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, Tony and I had been kicking around starting a band together for, geez, probably since around 2014, give or take. And you know, so I had played with Tony a bit, and you know, their old band Totomoshi and Fatso Jetson had played a bunch of shows together. So I you know, I actually met Meg and Tony originally. They came to see my band Fatso Jetson and this other band called Caius back in 1995 up in San Francisco when we were on tour. And, you know, so like I'd known them as people, and then Tony and I had like played together a couple times. Like we kept trying to kind of get a band together, but just due to the timing, it didn't work out. But once we started playing, you know, it was pretty, you know, and we knew that All Souls was going to be a much more structured, focused band, you know, so like going into it, I completely understood that. And quite frankly, I mean, I've played in a lot of bands over the years, and Fatso Jetson's really the only band that I've ever been in that operates the way that it does. And I don't know that any other band could really operate that way. I mean, I'm sure other bands do, but I just mean in terms of over the years, like whether it's been All Souls or you know, for a while I played in a band called Deep Dark Robot with Linda Perry, or with Brant Bjork, or with, you know, whatever. It's like all of those bands were much more like All Souls. Like Fatso Jetson is like kind of a weird anomaly where it just, the way that it works is by accident. Like we didn't plan for it to be this way. It's just the way it is. And it's the way that we've all become comfortable in doing it. So, you know, playing with Tony and Meg, you know, it was, you know, very natural for me. Just in the sense that, you know, there's a structure to everything, and you know where everything's going to be and how everything's going to go. Whereas, you know, Fatso, like I was saying, it's sometimes it's like jumping off a cliff and hoping the parachute opens, because trust me, for every time that parachute is open, there's been a couple times where it's just fallen to the ground. And I mean, we're sitting there on stage, like playing our balls off, but like we don't know what we're doing. And like, I mean, it just that's the nature of improvisation, you know, is sometimes it works out amazingly and sometimes it fails spectacularly.
Right, but that's the risk you take, like you said, right? When you improvise, it's either, I mean, there has to be a time that it doesn't work, and that's part of life, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, you know, the biggest thing with that is you've always got to be willing to fail.
Right.
You know, like I'm always willing to, I would much rather take a chance and blow it than not take a chance at all, you know?
Right.
And
so let me ask you this. When you're in a situation like that, when you're like jamming on stage and maybe you think that nothing is happening, how do you, I guess, solve that? You know what I mean? Like when you're on stage, you're looking at each other and it's like, okay, I guess this is not working. Is it time to end or?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for me, it's always a lot of nervous and awkward looks at each other, you know, of like, come on, let's wrap this up, you know, because I mean, there are times when you're doing that and you know, somebody in the band, you know, is like, I'm gonna try to save it, you know, but I personally have learned that like I can tell pretty quickly where things are going and if it's gonna work out. And you know, but sometimes somebody else is like, no, if we keep going, maybe we'll pull it together, you know, and you know, that you know, that can get embarrassing at times. Not embarrassing, but you know, 9 times out of 10, people that are watching you don't even realize that like you don't think it's that great, you know. So it's really about, okay, here, perfect example. The first show that Fatso Jetson ever played in Europe, we got flown over to play this festival called Dynamo. Metallica
Wow.
was headlining that day. There were all these bands and a whole bunch of our friends were also playing, and we were just like so excited. And there's like 50,000 people there, and it's our first time going overseas to go play. And within the first 30 seconds of the first song, Mario broke like 3 strings on his guitar.
No.
And he kind of panicked, and he kind of went like, we were playing a song that like had a verse, a chorus, a bridge, you know, but like 30 seconds into the song, that all went out the window. And the next thing we're doing is, you know, I always joke and call it Spinal Tap reference, but we go into this like 10-minute jazz odyssey, you know, of just improvising in front of this huge festival crowd. And I'm like, you know, Mario's just like stressed, and Larry's like kind of trying to figure out where they're at, and I'm just sitting there like, fuck, how do I hold this together? And when we were done, I was just horrified by like what we had done. But then the guy that we had there who was selling our merchandise, afterwards, he came running backstage and was like, what was that? And we were like, well, Mario broke a couple strings, and then it threw us weird. And he's like, dude, everybody came to the merch table like wanting to buy like whatever that was, you know? And it was like, well, you know, I don't know what to do. He's all, well, I kept telling him, oh, it's on this record or it's on that record or, you know, whatever. But, you know, I mean, I think I can speak for Mario and Larry, but we were all kind of just really just bummed at our performance. But then everybody was like, no, that was amazing, you know? And so
Wow.
it's like one of those things where, you know, you take a shit and sometimes you accidentally step in it and sometimes it works out okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's really curious because, I mean, I think you guys were bummed out, but I think you were bummed out because you care, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, because we had an idea of what we wanted to do, but that idea like went right out the window. And then it was like, well, what are we gonna do? And you know, it's kind of hard sometimes. It's when there are a lot of songs that we have where we know that we're going to improvise X amount of time in it. But when it comes up out of nowhere, like that gets kind of weird because, you know, I mean, you're literally trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat, you know? And
Right. Well, I wonder why do people see these things differently as you guys as a band, you know, because you were like playing and you're like, oh shit, we're going to fuck up, but people are like, oh my god, this is the best because
I mean, they don't know that we didn't know what we were doing, you know? I mean, for all they know, we're playing a new song they've never heard, or they've never even heard of us before and they just showed up, you know? To us, it's horrible because we know what we wanted to do,
right,
and that changed. But for them, you know, it was like, oh, here's this band that started playing that song, and then they just like made a weird left turn, and like, wow, that was great. And you know, it's like going out on a first date with a girl, and like you have it all planned out in your head.
Yeah, I know.
And you know, but then you say something that like just throws you off your game, and the rest of the night you're like, wait, is this working out? Like whatever. And you know, I mean, thankfully for us on that particular night, you know, the proverbial girl enjoyed what we were doing and everything worked out. But like I said, sometimes, you know, it doesn't always go that way.
Yeah, I think I have a theory, and let me know what you think. Maybe it's because in at least in that scenario, you guys show more vulnerability, you know, because you had like this, like you said, you have the show mapped out, but it didn't work that way, and people somehow sensed that vulnerability and felt more connected, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I also think that people like, yeah, I know that I like, if I go to see a band play, I don't want to see them play everything exactly like it was on the record. You know, like when I would, back in the day when Fugazi was still a band, when I'd go see Fugazi play, I loved when they stretched out on stuff and reinterpreted their own music, you know, and you know, I think fans of music like to see musicians be musicians instead of just being robots that just like play part.
Right, that's interesting. Well, Tony, before I let you go, I mean, I've been talking to a lot of drummers lately on the podcast, and that has started this thing that I want to ask drummers. When you go and record an album, do you have, or how do you come up with how the drums want it to sound? You know what I mean? Like the sound of the drums.
I honestly, that for me, that differs literally from recording to recording. You know, sometimes the necessity is you set up your drums, you mic them up, and you just have one drum sound for the whole record. You know, but then I've also had the ability to play on records where, you know, every song, you know, you take it song by song and think about, and it's what I prefer to do, but is to sit down and like, what works best for this song, you know? I mean, because to me, everything should be focused on what works best for a song,
Right.
you know? And as much as I'd love to show off and go, look what I can do, you know, it's like, that doesn't work for everything, you know? So I mean, the way I approach it normally is I have an idea. I normally sit down and think of each song and like what the vibe of that song is, how the drums should be, how the drums should sound. You know, it really it comes down to the idea of like, wow, should this be like a big roomy sound with like a really tight snare and a lot of reverb though on everything? Or, I mean, I guess, you know, it comes down to really what works best for the song.
Right.
And what can you do to make that song sound better? You know?
For sure. So you, let me see if I get this right. So you don't come to the studio and say like, okay, I want my drums to sound like this, I don't know, Black Flag album or this Led Zeppelin album. So it's more like, okay, I'm here and we have practiced the songs before, so I kind of have like an idea of how I wanted it.
Yeah, because I mean, look, of course, I would love for my drums to sound as rad as John Bonham, but you know, maybe John Bonham doesn't sound right on a certain song, you know, and you know, and let me obviously say I'm very well aware that I'm not John Bonham, but you know, but like a big roomy sound like John Bonham, sometimes that doesn't work on a song, you know, sometimes like it needs a really like tight, you know, focused mic type deal on the kick and the snare that you know, the big roomy John Bonham sound like just doesn't work on, you know, and yeah, I try my best to just, you know, I try to think of what makes the song sound better. And you know, at rehearsal earlier today, you know, Matt, our guitar player, you know, started suggesting, you know, different patterns for me to play on the drums. Like I never think that I'm absolutely right. You know, I am always open to suggestion. If somebody has, you know, a rhythm that they hear in their head or a pattern, like I don't necessarily think that my ideas are like, if I come up with something like that's it, you know, it's like if somebody's like, hey, you're doing this thing that's like super just like, and this happens actually a lot in All Souls, is that I'll err on the side of simplicity, you know, like, okay, I'm just gonna be playing in the pocket, you know, whatever. But you know, Tony will be like, dude, get all Keith Moon right there, you know, and it's like, oh, well, I just thought that might be a little too busy or whatever, you know, and sometimes it's the other way where you come up with something that's just like kind of crazy and it sounds cool, but it clashes with the vocal or whatever. And you know, I think a part of playing music is checking your ego at the door and being open to what your bandmates have to say, you know, because just because I came up with something doesn't empirically make it right, you know.
For sure.
And you know, and especially with drums, you know, because you know, drums, as much as drums can complement a song, they can be really distracting if you're overplaying. And it's that fine line of like knowing where to sit in the middle of that.
Right. No, I agree, man. And especially like you said, in a band, you have to listen to your bandmates. Otherwise, while you're playing with them, right?
Yeah.
Well, Tony, I mean, it's been a pleasure talking to you, brother. Hopefully we can do a second part because I mean, I know we can talk a lot about music and
yeah, for sure.
and where you grew up. But thank you so much, brother. Like I said, it's been a pleasure. And I want to give a shout out to Tony and Meg for making this happen. I mean, Tony Aguilar is like my booking agent now. He has connected me with great people like yourself, brother.
Thanks, man. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk with me.